And who also better to talk about the debt side of it? Maya mentioning the word debt quite a few times, and that is what is catching a lot of people out. That's what's causing people to drown financially, and they could end up in a situation where their items are being attached. The sheriff is pitching up at the front door, being blacklisted, all those terrible things. There are ways to avoid it. As Maya says, if you've got a 13th check, try and use that to settle your debt. But sometimes people because of various situations, are too far gone. What do? You don't panic, of course. You get hold of a company like Debt Rescue. We often speak to Debt Rescue's Debt Rescue SA COO, Anneline van der Poel, and she's taken time to join us again this morning. Hello to you, Anneline. Good to have you back on ENCA. I'm not sure if you were able to hear what Maya was saying. In an ideal world, we get a 13th check. We're all very responsible adults, and we pay off our credit card. But sometimes life happens. COVID happens, retrenchments happens, and here we are. So what point, if you're drowning, do you go into something like Debt Rescue?
Good morning, Gareth. Indeed, I mean, what Maya said is obviously, the perfect solution, and we completely advocate budgeting, know what's going on, fully understand what your true financial circumstances are. The comments, for example, about the massages and the KFC breakfast, that is very true. But what we are really seeing more and more on our side is a lot of consumers have already removed that from their budgets. They are literally, they can't put food on the table anymore, and they're having to juggle between trying to avoid legal action by not paying their debt versus putting food on the table. We're seeing a massive increase on payday loans. In other words, you're taking a loan. We know one of our big banks recently also put out, 5 days after salary is paid in, there's nothing left in the bank account. You still have to continue buying groceries and, electricity and fuel and so forth. So the reality is, you need to be very honest with yourself. You need to go and do that budget. You need to go and get a true understanding of what are your personal circumstances. Can you make changes? Have you made the changes? But if you can't, that you need to say, I can't balance between paying those minimum installments I need to make every month for my debt, as well as my realistic living expenses. And if you can't, that you need to start seeking help from a professional in the form of a debt counselor so that they can help you find a way to avoid legal action, avoid blacklisting and so forth, repay your debt, honor your debt, because that's what most consumers actually want to do, but still being able to put food on the table without having to incur further debt and get yourself into this vicious debt cycle.
Because in the end, creditors and lenders and debtors, they're going to want their money back, and the longer you ignore them, you're going to just make the situation worse for yourself. I mean, it does happen, doesn't it, Anneline, where people's houses get attached, their cars get taken away by the sheriff. These things do happen, but we don't need to reach that particular stage. I just want you to expand for a moment. If someone was to get hold of, for example, Debt Rescue, how do you, as a company, take all the debt? I think the word is consolidation. Correct me if I'm wrong. How do you end up helping a client keep their debt being paid off so the creditors are all happy, but leave them with some extra money to get them through the month? How do you actually do that?
So we do exactly what we advocate everybody else to do. Is first we start with a budget. We help to do an assessment of what your expectations are, what your requirements are in terms of your living expenses. So here we factor in, for example, if you're renting, food, school fees, transport, insurances, cell phones, etc. What it is that you require to function normally every single month financially from that perspective. And then on the other side, we obviously do an assessment of what your holistic debt is. Now, as you said, you consolidate it, not through a loan, but you take all of the debt in totality. So this would include home loans, vehicle installments, credit cards, personal and store cards, overdrafts, and put them all together and say, okay, what is the minimum required monthly? And then obviously we do an assessment to see what would be a sustainable monthly debt review repayment. And what that then entails is, as debt counselor, we would contact your credit providers and we renegotiate on your monthly installments with your credit providers on your behalf. Understanding that this is legislated, it forms part of the National Credit Act, meaning that the credit providers have to engage us. This process has been around now since 2007. And, everybody knows exactly what is required, what is expected, what needs to be done, what needs to be assessed. and we renegotiate then on your behalf to reduce those installments. And by doing this, obviously, it involves extending the repayment term to an extent. But most importantly, because this is a legal process, it ensures protection of your assets. It prevents legal action, etc. So your debt counselor will then make sure that that the agreement is reached, a court order is obtained to make sure, because obviously you are dealing with contractual agreements here between the consumer and the credit provider. So these are new negotiations. You make them an order of court, and then your consumer is then protected as long as they continue paying the amount that is agreed upon with the credit providers. And it's usually single monthly installment, so it also alleviates the burden. I mean, the average consumer used to have approximately 7 accounts. It's now sitting in the region of between 11 and 14 that they have to pay every single month. So it's a single monthly installment at the reduced rate, and you have those funds available in your budget to make sure you can still repay or live and pay your normal living expenses.
As is always the case, Anneline, and this will be my last question, is it does make a big difference. I know a few people who've gone either through Debt Rescue or one of the other organizations. It does save them a lot of money every month while making sure their debt is paid off as well, and they can just run the process. It could take a couple of years, though, depending how quickly you get that debt paid off. But there are not hurdles. I don't want to be unfair here, not hurdles, but there are one or two things to look out for that I understand. One of those is, while you are under Debt Rescue, you're not blacklisted, under debt review, sorry. You're not blacklisted, but you aren't able to take out any more credit. So you need to be careful with things like, for example, if you're renting a property, you can't move in the next few years because you probably won't get the financing for it. You can't buy a new car. You can't buy a new house. So yes, it rescues it, but there is the other side of the coin, isn't there? You've got to be careful and plan properly for the next few years.
Well, yes, obviously, that's going to depend on the type of debt you have. If I can maybe just address, for example, the rental side. Rental side, you can definitely move. Usually, most of the estate agents would just ask that your debt counselor provides a document to confirm that your budget has provision for this rental amount that you want to rent for. So rental, you can definitely move. Understanding that the purpose of debt counseling is to get out of debt. And for that reason, you should not be incurring any further debt because you won't be able to settle what you have. And I think one of the biggest psychological changes we need to make as consumers is we've gotten very, very used to the ability to have credit and swipe the card. But the reality is, you are using that card, whether it's a store card or a credit card or getting the loan, because you cannot afford to pay for those items cash. And with debt counseling, exactly what we do is we start at the beginning and we say, what would you normally use that credit facility for? Would it be, for example, to go and put fuel in your car or buy groceries? We're preventing that because the whole point is to get you out of the debt. So you can't go and incur any further debt or credit, because whatever it is that you were using that credit for is now provided for in your living expenses. So there is a bit of a changeover. Yes, indeed, you have to repay your debt, but that's the whole point of making sure that that budget is done from the beginning to make sure that it is provisioned for.
Yeah, absolutely, and make sure your assets are not taken away, because eventually the creditors will have had enough of you ignoring their calls and they'll start coming to knock on your door. Debt Rescue, SA COO, always a pleasure. Anneline van der Poel joining us here on ENCA as well. It's very, very good advice. If you find yourself not even getting through to the end of the month, have a very real, honest conversation with yourself and something like Debt Rescue. There are a few organizations, but Debt Rescue, they take all of your debt, put it into one lump sum that gets taken care of, and it does free up some money, of course, for you. So do not wait until you get hauled off to court. That you don't want.